We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
G'day and welcome to another live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than one way to be a man. In essence, we're simplifying masculinity and manhood for all the men out there on their individual journeys. And today we are joined by Sathya Sam, who is an international speaker, coach, and author of The Last Relapse, a groundbreaking guide that blends Bible-based principles with research-backed strategies to tackle the root causes of addiction. A leading voice in helping men break free from pornography addiction, Sathya's work has impacted NBA players, surgeons, business owners, and countless others. His unique approach is grounded in empathy, research, and his own 15-year battle to overcome his pornography addiction, which he kicked in 2016. Sathya is on a mission to help men reclaim their integrity, purpose, and freedom, and he joins us today on the Mankind Podcast. Sathya, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man. That's quite an intro.
No, mate. Well, you're quite the guest, let me say. So I'm eager to hear about your backstory and how you've ended up in the space. So the mic is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, I mean, nobody ends up in the porn addiction recovery space because they wanted to when they were a boy necessarily. So, my journey starts at 11 years old in the computer lab of my school, and that's where I was first exposed to pornography. I had a pretty good upbringing. I grew up in a pastor's home, relatively sheltered, I think you would call it, and really had every reason to be set up to not make bad decisions in life, like watching porn. But I saw when I was 11, it's not like I was addicted overnight. It just planted a little seed. And as you know, Brandon, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for those seeds to get watered. But if they're not dealt with, they do eventually blossom. And so in high school, I watched more often. And by the time I was in my 20s, I literally planned my days around when I was going to watch pornography. And mind you, I was a high achieving academic at that time. I had 5 figures in research grants, tons of scholarships to do the work I was doing. I was working part-time. I was volunteering. I was doing university research. I mean, I had everything stacked on my plate. But the thing I looked forward to the most and the thing that I did not miss was watching pornography when it was all said and done. That's what allowed me to calm down and get a good night's sleep. And I really and truthfully, like any good addict, told myself I can quit when I want. It's not a big deal. It's just a season, yada, yada, yada. And then that time came when I was ready to quit. And I thought, I don't want this in my life anymore. I could kind of feel like I was dependent and I was sort of in the clutches of it. And that's when I realized that I was really actually addicted, because I went 3 days and I had a huge binge afterwards. And I kind of just repeated this cycle. And for the first few years that I was in recovery, I was doing it on my own. I was trying to just piece different solutions together. I'd hear something here, try something there, and no system, no strategy, but just, it was still earnest effort, but not really getting a lot of success. And it was in the last 2 years of recovery that I started to find a little bit more breakthrough and healing. I had my last relapse in February 2016. Waited a couple of years. I always knew I wanted to help other guys in this area, but I waited a couple of years just to make sure that this wasn't just some temporary thing, that there's actually permanent change. And in December 2018 is when I launched Deep Clean, and we've gone on to help. I've personally helped 1,500 men quit pornography, but we reach hundreds of thousands a week now with our platforms, and we've been able to pioneer kind of a roots-based approach to recovery for men around the world.
Powerful, man. From deep cleaning their socks to deep cleaning their souls.
Yeah, exactly, man. That's exactly it.
So let's talk about some of the roots, because for many in any form of addiction, oftentimes the addiction is described as a symptom of a deeper underlying problem here. So you have over 1,500 success stories. And so what are some of the more common underlying issues that these men are presenting with when they come to you? Because I'm sure many of them just think like, I need to kick porn. And I imagine you have different conversations.
Yeah, definitely. The conversation is different eventually. But I think to answer your question directly, when people come to us, usually there is some sort of relationship discord. So either they're in a committed relationship and There's been some breach of trust. There's a lack of intimacy. Maybe the marriage has become sexless, or it's somebody is single and they just can't have a functional relationship. Sometimes, especially in younger professionals, like we work primarily with professionals these days, and younger professionals, we're seeing a lot of apprehension about even just approaching a woman. They don't know how to do it because pornography has basically been the only place they could experience acceptance or, a lack of rejection, as it were. So it's relationship issues is a big one. Low self-esteem is another big one. Just low self-image, low self-worth. And addiction is very reinforcing of low self-worth, especially if you've tried a few things and these seem to work for other people. So you try it doesn't work for you, and you conclude something must be wrong with me. That shame starts to kind of creep in. And I would say the other thing that guys are often presenting with is some sort of escalation of their behavior. So I went from watching pornography that's relatively mainstream to watching more obscure niche content. I went from watching pornography to paying for sex. I went from watching pornography to having an affair, going to a parlor. That escalation is often a wake-up call for guys to get help, and also a very good indicator that they are probably in a much more severe addiction than they realize.
So you mentioned being 11 years old when you were exposed in the computer lab. What's the average for how young and how early people are being exposed? Because I remember my mate and I was probably 10 or 11, and we went into my brother's room. He had a PlayStation, and I found this, like, I turned on the PlayStation to play a game, and boom, this DVD opens up. And I remember him and I sitting behind the couch, like he was kind of like screaming and crying, and I just was completely in awe of what I was witnessing. I couldn't, it just broke my brain.
Yeah.
In that moment, but the intrigue was certainly there. So what are you finding? Like, what are the early ages that people are getting exposed?
So, yeah, there's a bit of a range here. Like some reports suggest that it's as low as 8 now, the average age of first exposure. Some reports show it's higher, like 12 or 13 years old. I think generally it lands in the middle, around when you and I were exposed, around 10 or 11 years old. But the big difference from when you and I were exposed, or even if you go a few generations back, where it was Playboy magazines, and not a few generations, just one more generation back, VHS and physical material. The big shift now is it's not just the exposure, but it's the volume of exposure, because you get exposed on a handheld device, a phone or an iPad or something like that. And then you can go back to it again and again. Like when I got exposed, I didn't actually go home and watch, because I had the same thing. Like it was shock and horror and intrigue, like a little bit of everything. And then when I did get into pornography, I had to strategically get on the family computer at a time when no one was around and watch. Like there were barriers to entry that just don't exist today.
Yeah.
So even though the average age of first exposure, exactly, it's relatively the same. It's the phone that is really allowing people to access it in way, way greater prevalence, greater volume. And what is considered mainstream today was considered wildly violent and aggressive 10, 15 years ago. So even the type of content that's considered normal now is really, really intense, very, very toxic messaging kind of coming out through it. And so, if you look at the age of first exposure, superficially, the number's about the same, but the story underneath is what's really changing. And that's largely driven by tech.
Got you. So there's, so I find that just like I can't get onto my Instagram feed without having sexually explicit imagery show up in front of me, like just OnlyFans accounts. And look, I don't think my algorithm is all that unique, because I consciously do not select that kind of content.
Right.
But when I'm browsing, it just pops up. I've noticed as well, there are like some really interesting Instagram feeds. Some of them will be like, scariest places on earth, or it'll be inside history. And these Instagram accounts will showcase an OnlyFans model or something for just a day and pin it at the top of their channel just to get eyeballs, and then they remove it.
Wow.
So they're putting it up there and then they're removing it because they know it's attracting a lot of attention. Like they're leveraging it in their marketing, they're leveraging it. And it's just, sometimes I'll comment on there and I'll sound like probably like some Karen or whatever, but I'm like, this is ridiculous. I came here to learn about like random artifacts of, the 16th century or whatever. And then so many people jump on it and like, oh, simp, beta, incel, like people jump on all that stuff. And I'm like,
yeah.
Y'all are the afflicted. All right. At the end of the day.
Yeah, it's crazy because what you're talking about is the industry will even do this to a greater extent because the industry is an industry. They're largely driven by revenue, and it is estimated
$100 billion industry.
right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So like we're not talking about chump change here, and if you're in business, you know that the only two ways a business grows is you either get more customers or you increase what's called LTV, the lifetime value of the customer. And the industry knows that if you get exposed at a young age, your LTV is going to be a lot higher because you're more likely to develop the dependency. So there's also strategies that some of these mega porn companies have to just it seems very innocently and like, just a couple clicks away, but they know what they're doing. They're seeding even children along the way so that they do get exposed to pornography online because they know if they can kind of plant the seeds early, again, they're just more likely to become a client later on that they can capitalize off of with their ad revenues and the other ways that they generate profit.
How do you approach the topic of shame when working with your clients?
Shame gets muddled with guilt very often. So the first thing I usually do is draw a distinction between the two. Guilt is I have done something bad. Shame is I am bad. So guilt actually can have a healthy place, I would say, not all the time, but if you did something wrong and you didn't feel guilty about it, that's a big problem, right? Guilt can kind of keep us on the straight and narrow, as it were. Shame, I don't know that shame really serves a place. I think we're very quick to say shame on you and all this kind of stuff, or you should be ashamed of yourself. I really don't like that kind of language because generally shame is there's something wrong with me. And as long as we operate out of a place of inferiority, insecurity, and feeling like that we're fundamentally flawed, I don't see how we could really actually behave the way we want to behave and live the lives that we want to live. So that's the first thing, is drawing the line. I think the second thing is, obviously when it comes to sexual issues, shame is a huge part of that. And there's several different ways that you can de-shame. But I would say the two things that we've observed that are really, really liberating for guys is, first and foremost, to tell the truth. Telling the truth is incredibly powerful. And just being able to have a safe outlet for you to tell the truth about your situation. I'm struggling with pornography. I've been struggling for 15 years. For me, like I'm very involved in church. So I was a pastor that was struggling with pornography, like living that double life. And just being able to confess that I was doing that, unbelievably liberating. And I think that's very helpful, that the dark things sort of come to light. And that's really, really beautiful in the de-shaming process. And I think step two is not just trying to break out of shame, but it's actually trying to step into shamelessness, or a life where shame is not influencing or governing your thought life and the way that you view yourself, stepping into a new identity. And I think that's part two. That's actually our third pillar in our system, is shifting your identity, because I really believe that if we make shame the problem, sometimes we end up just making the problems a bigger deal than they need to be. It's like a mountain out of a molehill. So we definitely want to de-shame, don't get me wrong. But the goal is not to break out of the shame. The goal is for you to become everything you were made to be, to step into your potential and to make this world a better place. And I think that's part two of de-shaming, is actually just concentrating on the things that lie ahead for you that are going to actually make the world better.
Oh man, that's powerful. I love that, because there is, all emotions are here to teach us something, right? We can leverage joy. We can leverage fear. We can leverage, fear is going to stop us from walking into a busy street. Right. Anger is going to allow us to perhaps protect or defend, ourselves or our loved ones, or activate into productivity or whatever that is. But shame is just one of those emotions where it's like being knee high in mud. And it's like, what can come of this? Right. I can learn something from it, but at some point I need to choose to get out of the mud and choose different, because it just becomes this like spiral. Right.
Man, it's such a good metaphor too, because a lot of recovery approaches are very shame-based. Like, I'm so bad, so I need to be good. I need to make up for it. So I'm going to do all the good recovery work. A lot of guys try to do recovery on their own, and that in of itself is very reinforcing of shame,
Right?
Because it's saying, I can't let anybody in, because if I did, they'd find out who I am, and that would be a problem. In our program, we talk about the shame, fear, control cycle. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but shame leads to fear, the fear of being found out, that something's wrong with me. And because I'm afraid of being found out, I will control a situation. and to cover it up, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So this cycle is why you'll see, like I said, we work with a lot of professionals and high performers, and they are, I mean, we are experts at the shame fear control cycle, at kind of masking things, putting on a facade. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, there's another story. And so it's why breaking out of the shame is so powerful, you know, and it's why I love what you guys do. I love the events you run. You're very focused on this, and it's naturally built into guys getting together and doing things that break shame, because we're just being seen for who we really are. And I think it's so valuable to have that, because otherwise the shame can creep back in very easily.
Well, I can tell you, man, when I realized as an adult how much of, this is in my early 20s, how much I placed my self-worth on my penis size or performance in the bedroom, like those metrics being so shallow and not being indicative of one's own self-worth, yet had so much weight and control over me. And I understand now how much my conditioning through watching porn made me feel that way, because how am I going to measure up to the guy who gets paid for having a massive Johnson? Like, how am I going to compare myself to something like that? So it immediately kind of kicks in this inferiority piece. But finding the Mankind Project, being able to sit in circles where I could bring out my bank statement and drop my pants and not even care. Right? Like the two most terrifying
the two things
things.
for a guy, that's it right there. You hit the two big ones.
That's what I love about our men's circles. The men's circle we lead here in Chattanooga is like, we've gone there. You know, right after the election, we held a circle and we all shared who we voted for, and we all shared like just our conditioning around politics and social, you know, how socially engaged we are, and we came out of it closer, although we were so different in so many ways. And we talk about nudity, we talk about shame around sex and pornography, and it's amazing. Like, I'd say probably north of 50% of the guys in my circle use porn. And I think that's unsurprising.
Yeah,
certainly unsurprising.
Yeah, it lines up with the stats for sure. What you're talking about is a really interesting in regards to the body. This is something that's been on my heart a lot more recently, just because a lot of our client stories are resulting in misperformance in the bedroom, inferiority complexes. And there was actually a study that came out. This was 2 or 3 years ago, and it was like 1,800 men, something like that. They surveyed a bunch of guys, and they found that men who viewed pornography were more likely to develop eating disorders. And the reason is because of the body dysmorphia that was coming from viewing pornography. And so because they felt inferior about their bodies, they felt like, you know, their appendages weren't lining up. They didn't have the six packs. They didn't look the way they were supposed to look. They were more likely to exhibit the eating disorder behaviors, binging, purging, avoiding food, all that kind of stuff. And it just tells us that pornography is not what we think it is. We think we're watching pornography just to, you know, get a quick release. We think we're watching it to take the edge off. We think we're watching it because everybody does it, and what's the big deal? But there's messages. Media always has a message. And sometimes the message that we extract from pornography is that we're not good enough. You know, that something's fundamentally flawed with our bodies. And that can lead into all kinds of issues, like I said, sexually, you know, in the bed, but even just the way, you know, can you actually look in the mirror rather, and look yourself in the eyes? Like, a lot of guys can't do that. Now, we have this thing, we coined it, we call it mirror therapy, where guys actually have to do that. They get in front of the mirror, they look themselves in the eyes, and they start to speak truth over themselves. And the whole point is just trying to confront those parts of you that you feel ashamed about, those parts that you feel like you could never actually look. That's how you start to conquer the shame. And it's I would say bonus points if you can do it the way you're doing it in a community with other guys. That's incredibly powerful, not just for de-shaming, but it's actually really powerful for just recovery in general.
Yeah, no, there's certainly no denying the community impact of that. So if you can remove the shame, right, and help create spaces where men are like, oh, I am not alone in this. This isn't my own little dirty dark secret. A large portion of the percentage of men in the world experience this as well. Yeah. And being able to work alongside them, you know, I'm working on my stuff, they're working on theirs. There's that kind of accountability that gets created in that environment, which is, far more impactful than the individual, like you said, who tries to figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
Let's talk. We've talking about the psychology around this, and we've touched on it. Let's talk about the science. in ways, how the brain reacts to pornography. What is it that, what is the reward that we're seeking? I know for me in my pornography use, whenever I was trying deep in the throes of procrastination, not wanting to do the thing that I needed to do, or I was just really stressed and wanted to numb out, that was my trigger to get into it. But what I've never fully grasped is the reward system, how the brain actually, what changes in the brain, in the build up, in the release. I'd love to learn more about that.
Oh man. Okay. I'm going to try not to geek out too hard. Like I said, I was a university researcher, so I love this stuff.
Let her rip.
Okay, a couple things to just kind of set this up and give some context. The first thing is a lot of people talk about dopamine. We talk about dopamine all the time today. And we talk about getting our dopamine hits, right? Whether it's scrolling on Instagram or, whatever it might be. Dopamine is probably better known as the pleasure-seeking chemical, not the pleasure-achieving chemical. And so what a lot of the addiction research suggests is that it's not the acquisition of pornography, it's not watching the thing that is so addictive, it's the anticipation of watching pornography that is so addictive. And if you like, I mean, I think back in the day when I used to watch pornography, I would do a search, I would open up a bunch of tabs, right? So you open up all the tabs, you kind of set yourself up for something to look forward to. And that's what actually makes pornography very addictive. And we could be talking about gambling or anything else. That's just addiction science 101. It's the anticipation of pleasure that is actually very, very addictive. With pornography specifically, pornography is what they call a supernormal stimulus, Brandon. So what that means is the level of stimulation pornography provides you is unnatural. Your brain and your body were not actually designed for that kind of stimulation. Your brain almost doesn't know what to do with it. That's why the way you described your first exposure was shock, right? Or shock and awe. I think you said you were in awe, right? Awe, like that overwhelm, that stimulating overwhelm. That's because pornography is a super normal stimulus. And the last thing I'll mention before I talk about how porn actually affects the brain is that sexual stimulation is processed 20% faster in your brain. So getting addicted to like exposure to cocaine versus pornography, to just be really extreme for a moment.
I can give you case studies for both.
100%.
I can give you anecdotal.
Yeah, right, exactly. 100%. And there is a little bit of science in this area, not a ton. I always get tons of feedback on that when I talk about this online. But the point is, if you were to snort cocaine and watch pornography, the pornography would actually be processed by your body 20% faster. So you're more likely to develop the dependency or the addiction, just because they're both very addictive, very stimulating, but sexual stimulation is processed faster. Okay, that's our context. The 4 ways that pornography affects your brain. The first is called desensitization. So if you may notice, if you've been watching pornography for really, let's call it longer than a year, which is probably a majority of your audience. Most guys fall into that category. You may observe that the kind of content you watch now compared to when you first started is different. Maybe you would say that what you used to watch, relatively speaking, was a lot more vanilla. That's actually because your brain has become desensitized. There was a tolerance that was built, and now your brain is looking for either something new or something that is more intense to compensate and to create that stimulation again. So desensitization increases your arousal threshold. An extreme version of this would be porn-induced erectile dysfunction, where pornography has raised the bar so high for what is required for the body to experience arousal that a real in-person experience no longer does it. It literally just like nothing happens. And that's becoming more prevalent in our society today, especially with digital natives who are getting exposed at young ages and watching a lot of pornography when they're in their early developmental stages. Second change that happens is called hypofrontality. So the prefrontal cortex, the frontal part of your brain, is what kind of makes you human. It's what separates you from all the other species. It's where you learn executive decision making, your sense of self is developed there, long-term reward, delayed gratification, all that stuff. Hypo means less. So when we say hypofrontality, it means you're not getting as much circulation to the brain or to that part of the brain. It becomes less active, as it were. And the result is you become more impulsive, your self-esteem declines, and you become a weaker decision maker, if I can put it that way. The third thing is a reduced stress response. That's pretty self-explanatory, but just your capacity and your propensity to handle stress is reduced. And the fourth is sensitization. And sensitization is why you might be triggered or aroused by non-sexual things. So for me, back in the day, a laptop on I remember my white desk where I used to watch a lot of pornography. That laptop just opened. If I would walk into the room and see it that way, I would just start to think about pornography because that was like a cue for my brain.
Right.
This is something that I normally see before we watch. Totally non-sexual, right? It's just technology. It's just a piece of tech, but it's become so ingrained into my brain as part of my consumption process that now every time I see it, I feel tempted to watch pornography. And so people that have been prolonged users of porn generally have this sensitization take place where non-sexual things cause them to think about porn and to want to watch it.
So can you summarize those four?
Yeah. So sensitization, hypofrontality, reduce stress response, and then the fourth one is sensitization.
Yeah.
And we should talk about rewiring as well, but I know there's a lot of information to unpack there.
Yeah, no, I can definitely, of the four, I related most to the decision-making piece and the stress, the ability to handle stress. Those were the two that stood out the most for me, which I could directly link to my porn use back in the day, for sure.
We're thrilled to have BetterHelp as a sponsor for the Mankind podcast. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist for live one-on-one sessions, someone trained to listen, support, and offer helpful insights. If getting one-on-one support feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to betterhelp.com/mankind and get 10% off your first month of therapy.
Let's talk rewiring and how we can, how we can, because I mean, I'm pretty big on the biohacking side of things. I do my infrared sauna every day. I might get in the cold plunge, maybe. Well, it depends on the day. But yeah, the brain I find so interesting. Like my wife and I, we take nootropics. We're sponsored by Magic Mind, which has an amazing little brain shot, which we love. So yeah, cool. Let's talk rewiring and how we can kind of game our neurology.
Yeah, for sure. So this will be a little bit less on the gamey supplemental side of it and a little bit more on kind of practical psychology, if you will. So the first thing to understand is that your brain can change. And I feel like I need to just really drill that point home with audiences these days, because especially if you've been struggling for a long time, if you maybe tried recovery a couple times, you might have concluded that I'm just wired that way, or my brain just can't get over pornography. We often say like my brain can't XYZ. And I just want to let you know your brain can change, period. And the research backs this up. There's tons of studies now that show any kind of manifestation or clinical manifestation of pornography addiction can be reversed. It doesn't matter how long you've watched, what you've watched, how old you are. We've had clients in their 70s do our program and have great results. So just to encourage your audience as a starting point, your brain can change, and the only qualifier is that it's functional. So as long as your brain's functional, you are capable of change. The best piece of neuroscience I can give to you on the rewiring part is it's a very, very simple piece, but it's really, really profound. A circuit in your brain can only change when active. So we've kind of bought into this lie that knowledge is power. Like I'll just consume more knowledge and then that will make me more powerful. But we are the smartest generation and we're more addicted and we're more anxious and depressed than ever before. Yep. And a huge reason is because we've actually become a lot heavier on the knowledge and a lot less on the action taking. So if you listen to this podcast or you're watching this live stream right now and you're getting some ideas on what you might need to do if you want to start changing your consumption of pornography and really breaking out of this addiction. Well, if you walk away from this podcast and you don't actually do anything, the problem is the circuitry in your brain doesn't get a chance to change, because as long as that circuitry is inactive, it's not going to change. You've just loaded a gun, but what actually pulls the trigger is action. So the next time you're tempted, if you apply something that you learned on the podcast today, because the circuit's active while you're tempted, and instead of you going down the search rabbit hole and watching pornography, instead you shut off your device or you go for a walk to clear your mind. If you do something different, that's where your brain actually rewires. And so that to me is like the best piece of advice I can give people is just take some action. Try something you haven't tried before, and do it in the moments when you're tempted, in the moments when it's the hardest, in the moments where ordinarily it would lead to XYZ. that's when you're going to rewire your brain the fastest. And so, so people always get discouraged, like, oh, I'm still getting tempted by pornography. And I'm like, dude, no, that's it. Like, you want those moments. Those are the moments that you need to leverage and actually convert into experiences that further you away from the addiction. Rewire your brain in those moments when the circuits are active.
You know, that's well, that speaks to the validity of, you know, methods like Gestalt therapy, where
Right.
you know, you're kind of taken to a place of trauma, you taken to a moment in time, and then you emotionally purge, you physically purge, you display set emotions that have been that exist when you think about that place or get triggered to that place, so that you can move through it. So it's like, not to say like the goal here isn't to not crave porn. An alcoholic who's been sober for 30 years still wants a freaking drink. Like they still have that desire, that craving, but something is stronger than that. Something in them is stronger, whether it's their constitution, their belief, their commitments, their relationships, responsibilities. They're more committed to that than the actual act of drinking or porn. You know, to me, that reminds me of Napoleon Hill, Seven Habits. No, Think and Grow Rich.
Yep.
Right. I don't know if you've come across that book.
Love that book.
Yeah. And so he talks about sexual transmutation, which I found very interesting for a book that was released in like, I don't know, like 1929 or something, to talk about like, okay, there is this energy, this sexual energy that can be transformed into action. I mean, the reason why I wanted you to come on the show, Sathya, is we have a lot of people come on and say, hey, I want to be on your podcast and talk about X. And oftentimes it's just a brand boosting thing. But a big thing for me is I want to see people who are actually doing the work, like actually have the track record. You so qualify for that. But yeah, most of those people that were coming were like, yeah, we help people earn six figures by transforming their sexual energy into output or whatever. And it sounded so hokey to me. I was like, this sounded like such BS, snake oil, whatever. However, the more I'm diving into this topic and this subject, and when I committed to my wife when my daughter was born that I would stop watching porn. So I'm going on, there was a relapse around when my daughter was 1. But when I feel those moments when I want to, it's like there's the conscious choice. It's like, okay, I'm not saying I won't masturbate. I can masturbate, but it's a different stimuli. It's mine. It's my own time. It's thinking and envisioning my wife or whatever. So it takes it away from that shame place, and our commitment remains. And or transform that into like, okay, now I'm going to eat the bullfrog that I've been putting off. And it's amazing that it's there. It's amazing that that energy actually comes up. So curious of your thoughts on sexual transmutation, how it applies to your work.
Well, I would just say that my work is really good anecdotal evidence for what you're talking about. Because when our clients go through our program, you know, we have about a 70% success rate of helping guys achieve at least 2 months in their first 4 months, 2 consecutive months. And actually, the longer people are with us beyond those 4 months, that number goes higher and higher.
Fantastic.
And the thing that we see that we get, I mean, the numbers are nice. The numbers are important from a marketing perspective to show people like, okay, we know what we're doing, at least to some extent. But what actually fires us up is the stories afterwards. You know, a year later, somebody circles back and they started that business they always wanted to start, or they finally asked that girl out, you know, they finally had the courage to do it. Those are the stories that we love. We just had somebody reach out to us like maybe about a month ago, and he's been clean of pornography for 18 months. And in those 18 months, he's run 2,200 miles. So he started running ultra marathons, and he just finished he was training for them. So that's why the number's so high, obviously, lots of training. Then he finally ran an ultra marathon. And actually, a very good example of what we talked about earlier. We talked about how pornography addiction can actually affect the way you view your body, but a great example of what happens on the other side of it. So he's quit pornography, and now he's channeling a lot of that time, energy, and other resources into something that's really good for his body, running ultra marathons. So he's in the best shape of his life. This guy's I think he's got 6 or 7 kids. He's like one of those people, they just keep popping them out. And he's living his best life now, because it wasn't the 7 kids that was draining him. That was like almost his cop out. It was actually his porn addiction. So taking care of the body, we hear a lot of that. A lot of guys get to the gym and they just start to, you know, get into better shape. And then the other big thing is just better relationships, because pornography is fast food intimacy. So a lot of people are on a fast food diet, instead of really investing those resources into their marriage, they are transferring them to pornography, to things that actually take away from them. And so when you get that energy back and you start to pour it into your marriage, you start to build safety and trust for your partner. You start to build healthy, legitimate intimacy. There's mutual knowledge and there's a desire for one another. That's a really beautiful thing. And it makes the home more stable if you have kids. It makes the society more stable because society needs those stable relationships as kind of the backbone for everything else that takes place within it. So that, I mean, we hear these stories all the time. I'm thinking of, we worked with a professional athlete who wanted to get married to someone, but basically his partner said, I don't want pornography coming into our marriage. And so he came into the program, and because he got clean and he starts to figure things out, he's able to get married. So yeah, 100% that you get so much back. You don't just get back some time. You don't just get back some sexual energy. You get all of it back, and you can channel it back into something better and make the world a better place.
So I want to challenge what the discussion we've had, because I know there are many whose feelings reflect the question, or at least the direction of the discussion that we may go now. So we had Dr. Lex James come onto the show. She's a phenomenal researcher on shame-free sex education, which I think is really powerful. It's the direction we want to raise our daughter and our future children to know that, like, it's their bodies. Sex education is going to be the most boring topic for my kids because they will have learned to.
They heard it all already. Yeah.
Right.
Love it, man.
In a safe, healthy place. Right. And when we were talking about pornography, she mentioned that, I'm trying to make sure I get this right so I can accurately flex. If the individual can have a healthy relationship with the content in which they're receiving, it's much more of that than it is blaming, I guess, the industry. And I guess to a point where she was saying, like, there are websites where they have, like, what's called feminist porn, which is none of the content they show is a woman being demeaned or being, abused or being forced into anything. It's all very generous lovemaking and such. I found that intriguing. So my question is, can someone have a healthy relationship, or is there a healthy version of pornography out there? Like, say it's a couple that like to watch it together,
Right.
So all that to say,
Yeah.
are we here
Very
to blame
good question.
porn for the problem, or is it really more an internal locus of control of the conversation where we need to address the individuals more?
It's a really good question, and maybe just a clarifying question about this woman. Was she talking about for children or for adults?
Adults.
With that information for adults. Okay,
Adults,
yeah. Okay.
Certainly not children. There was no, because we went there too. We went there too because at that time there was a lot of debate and a lot lot of arguments.
Like the sex ed curriculum,
early exposure, stuff like that. Yeah. So we we were both in agreement that was not being handled correctly.
Yeah, it's a different conversation for sure. So yeah, there are definitely two components in the adult world. One is just the content itself, and the other is the relationship to the content. So where I work and like the people that I serve are they have a bad relationship with pornography for sure. They're using it destructively. And I think people do make an argument that you could use pornography healthily, whether it's just I'm watching porn, it's not harming anyone else, and I just watch it occasionally, or I'm watching with my spouse and it's adding some spice to our sex life, or whatever it might be. I'm personally, I have a hard time believing it, and most of it is because of the longitudinal component. So there is some research that suggests couples do report higher sexual satisfaction when they watch pornography together. There's also studies that would suggest if you follow those couples long enough, eventually they report lower satisfaction. And I can't give you the exact reason. The study didn't either. But if I were to venture a guess based on just my own practice, I would say usually the guys are just learning. They're getting programmed to experience arousal apart from their partner, right? Because you're kind of getting conditioned to get it on the screen. So then what happens when, you have a desire and then your wife isn't around, or you and your wife got in a fight, that programming is there. So I think there's a danger on that front. I think even if you're the solo person, you just watch pornography whenever you want, it's not a big deal. I would counter with two arguments. I think the first is, why are you watching it? Like, what is porn actually providing for you in those moments? Because I can pretty much guarantee you there's probably a superior way for you to get that same need met. That would be my first argument, because whether it's comfort, it's connection, release of relief, whatever it is, there's probably a better way to do it. And I would say as well, in the category of sexual intimacy, the best sexual experiences are always going to be between two consenting individuals, not between a consenting individual and a screen, or a piece of tech. So to me, I'm just much more of an advocate for that approach. I think the other side of it, which is a little bit beyond the scope of my expertise, so I'll only just touch on it, would be the interplay between sex trafficking and some of the darker sides of the industry that interplay with pornography. And it's very hard to parse these things apart because there's things like ethical pornography, for example, where they kind of ensure that, there's nothing seedy going on when things are being produced and that sort of thing.
Right.
But I'm friends with a couple people that were actually, they were award-winning adult film stars. And in their heyday, they said that some of the conditions they were recording in were not very nice. They weren't being trafficked, mind you, but they were definitely being coerced on set. Like, if you want your paycheck, you're gonna have to do this scene, even if you're maybe not comfortable with what we're asking you to do. There's a lot of that going on. So there's sort of a what you're supporting component as well to that conversation that sometimes gets missed when it's like, oh, I just watched it occasionally and it's not a big deal. It's like, well, you might still be fueling something that's not actually so healthy for our society. And one last note about that, there's a couple organizations that have explored sex trafficking a lot more. This has become a burgeoning issue in the last 10 to 15 years. And a lot of them in their research have concluded that actually the porn industry is the marketing department for sex traffickers. It's sort of what signals and what gets people started on that journey. So again, lots of different layers to that, but my personal stance is I think generally your life is better without pornography.
Well, and if you're in a committed relationship or partnership with someone, you get to create it, right?
Exactly.
You get to create your own fantasies.
You get the real life experience.
Yeah, get the real life experience.
Yeah.
How many? Well, let me ask. How many? That's gonna be a hard one. Do you get a lot of incel types coming to you?
Incel. So to clarify, you just mean people who are like, women are all out to get me and I need pornography because there's no way I'd ever be with a woman, that kind of thing?
That kind of thing, yes.
We definitely have, probably not quite incel in the traditional sense of it. We definitely get guys who are very single because of pornography for a couple reasons. One is either pornography is just easier, there's no risk of rejection. Sometimes it's because they've gotten into relationships, they got burned, they got hurt, and pornography is just an easier choice that way. Or sometimes it's they're too afraid actually because this is sort of the other side of the coin. It's just they want to have a healthy relationship and they just have way too much insecurity about their struggle to actually pursue a relationship and get into one. So we do see that happen. But I'll tell you, in fact, I did a coaching call this morning. And one of the guys on the call was like, man, this is so cool. He had this big smile on his face. He's early 30s. And he's like, I just feel excited to date again. Because he's dated a little bit before, but a lot of his relationships didn't go very far, mostly because of his porn addiction. And he's just at a point in recovery where he's excited to date. He's excited to actually just pursue a relationship and put himself out there. So I think, like incel types, maybe not quite to that length, but definitely guys that are on that path. And again, if you have a more roots-based approach in your recovery efforts and you're really taking it seriously, I think it's a cool byproduct that you're, pro women again and wanting to get into a relationship.
Yeah. And I probably, rolling back the clock, I would have replaced incel with red pill.
Yes.
Yeah. Some more red pill types where it's like, women are the cause of our problems and such. And so in turn, they want to watch porn. That shows women being dominated, being, taken to uncomfortable places.
Yeah, well, that we definitely have clients who are in that category for sure, and they didn't get there from the beginning. Like that was an eventuality. Yeah, but again, most people that come to us are aware that something's off, and they do actually want that relationship, or they do want to have a healthier attitude towards women. Like most guys are. They at least have that desire, even if maybe they're not actually there currently.
There yet. Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. So let me ask you this then, before we get to finding out more about how we can, follow your journey and your work or get involved with your coaching. Two parts. First steps. What are some good first steps for anyone listening right now who finds themselves anywhere on that spectrum of pornography use, whether highly addicted to occasional use? What are some good first steps that men can take to kind of begin the process of changing or rewiring their brains and their behaviors?
Yeah, so good first steps. I'll give you three in ascending order of difficulty. So the first thing you can do is you can get a journal. I am so pro journaling. I think journaling is it's the first tool that we teach our clients. I think learning to journal is probably the easiest way to get started on the recovery journey. There's no risk of judgment or being found out. It's just you. It's private. Or I'm a man of faith, so it's between you and God. But there's a real nice privacy piece there, and you can get started. It's affordable. It costs you $1 at the dollar store, that kind of deal. And on the same level as a first step, I would say listening to content like this is great. We have a podcast that we put a couple episodes out a week because we just know how challenging this can be, and we try to be that voice in people's ears to remind them, hey, this is possible, and here's a tip. And so I think bugging your algorithms to send you content that's actually gonna be helpful can really go a long way. The second step would be talking to somebody. And I really do think it's necessary at some point, not just to get free, but to stay free. And what we typically would ask people is, who is the person in your life that you could tell them anything and they're not going to judge you for it? That's probably the person that you need to start with. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be, your story doesn't have to be mine. Most people are not going to be public facing about their recoveries, but finding one person that you can talk to, very, very good. Like we said, for the de-shaming process, but also that connection piece is so valuable. There's this adage that floats around in the addiction space, which is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And so really inviting that light into the dark, bringing other people in, building that connection goes a long way. And the bigger version of that is my third recommendation, which is that people plug into communities. They get involved in something like Mankind or Deep Clean, what we have going over here. Because when you are linked arm in arm with other men and you're pursuing a goal together, something synergistic happens. The sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we have just found that time and time again, the people who get the best results in our program are the guys that participate in the community. They're going above and beyond to connect with the guys. They're building friendships outside of their recovery groups. There's meaningful relationships that are being built in the process. And like I said, very important, not just to attain recovery, but to sustain it long term. The community piece is huge. So wherever you are, if you're just starting, start with a journal. If you've already done something like that, then talk to someone. And if you already talked to someone, find a community. And I think those are some great next action steps from an episode like this.
Fantastic. Before we let you go, tell us about the Man Within podcast.
Yeah, so like I said, we release a few episodes a week. We interview really excellent guests like yourself, Brandon. You're coming on in the new year. I'm really excited to have you. And the real goal is we are trying to reshape the whole conversation around what healthy masculinity looks like. The centerpiece of that is around sexual integrity and the things that we discussed today. And we give a lot of practical advice there. But in addition to the interviews, I do usually a couple 10, 12-minute segments, kind of commute-worthy segments, if you will, that you can listen to just to give a quick nugget, quick piece of wisdom, or some inspiration or some encouragement for your day. So it's available on all major platforms. It's called The Man Within.
Fantastic. Sathya, it's been a pleasure having you join us today to talk about a topic that I know impacts the lives of so many. Because if you yourself, listening out there, do not have a challenge with pornography, I promise you, you know someone in your circle who does, whether you know that they do or they don't. Right. So it's great to be able to have these conversations in the light, in the wide open, because it gives you, the listener, the gift of going second in having these conversations. And so I'm always grateful to have guests like yourself, Sam, Sathya, come on and talk about this stuff, because this kind of edges on the taboo side of things. And seldom do many stream said conversations to LinkedIn and Facebook and such. So proud to lean on those skinny branches to have these conversations, so that it gives people permission to do the same and seek the help that they need.
100%, man. Thanks for having me. And I love what you guys are doing. I think you guys embody a lot of the same values that we have found to be successful for men who are in recovery, and even just men who want a better quality of life. So you got another new fan, and we're cheering you guys on as well.
Beautiful. Well, I can't wait to be on the show. It's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, the biggest thanks of all goes to you all, the listeners, who join us each and every week for these edgy, taboo discussions and topics with experts like Sathya. So none of this is possible without you and your support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. What do you say, mate? Have we done that today?
I think we did our part.
I believe we did. Lots of love. We'll see you next week. This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your hosts, Boyson Hodgson and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes. Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. That is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.
Hey, it's Boyson here with the Mankind Podcast. We are closing in on 100 5-star reviews of this podcast, and we have a goal. Brandon and I want to get to 250 5-star reviews. So help us out, will you? Please go to the Mankind Podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. Thank you. Hey, it's Boyson. On the Mankind Podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.